In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, welcome friends to Crime and Punishment, a legal podcast, not a political one, a podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida, the website for which is augustusinvictus.com. Today we are not going to talk about the news. It is All Hallows Eve, popularly known in America as Halloween. The last Sunday of October, according to the traditional calendar of the Catholic Church, is the Festival of Christ the King. We're going to talk about that today, especially since tomorrow is All Hallows Day. Tuesday is usually our broadcast day. Can't broadcast tomorrow, so we're going to talk today. How about that? And as we discuss today, the foundations of modern law, contrasting it to medieval law, we're going to read from Michael Davies' booklet, The Reign of Christ the King in Both Public and Private Life. So, in the newsletter, I was pointing out that we take the social contract as something to be taken for granted. I'm posting the link to the newsletter in the chat. Take the social contract theory for granted, and that is basically we all agree that this is the way things are. We all agree to have a society. We shake hands and we pay our taxes, some of us, and we follow the laws, and we don't kill each other because we all agree that it's better to follow these laws and it's better to have this government than not. We all agree that the Constitution is the law of the land. We all agree that the Supreme Court interprets that. We all agree in a gentlemanly fashion that the White House enforces the law, the executive branch enforces the law, that Congress creates the laws, that the judiciary interprets the laws. We agree that people should have the right to vote. We agree that democracies don't go to war with each other, and so democracy is the best form of government. And so we all tacitly agree that this is the best contract we can have. That is the contract we have with one another. That we're going to abide by these laws, and we're going to believe in these things, and we're going to have this form of government, because otherwise we'd be murdering each other, stealing each other's wives, enslaving each other's children. So we come to this social contract, and that is the foundation of our society. What a load of garbage. What a load of absolute childish nonsense. And we hear this from the day we start elementary school. You pledge allegiance to the flag. You believe in the Constitution. We all agree on these laws. No, we don't. Who agreed to that? Were you born and you signed a contract on the dotted line saying, yes, I agree to be held by these laws. I agree to be under the protection of these laws of Florida. I agree that my mother and father should be in charge of me and that they should, provide for me, and in return for that, I'm going to owe them obedience until such time as I am emancipated or I become of majority age. You didn't agree to any of that. It's a myth, the social contract. And yet, we as children, we are taught, well, Rousseau was a very smart person, and he said this, that, and the other. Well, Kant was a genius. And this is what he said about democracy. And this is what he said about international relations. Democracies don't go to war with each other. Therefore, of course, democracy is the best form of government. Because if every country in the world was a democracy, there would be world peace. No one would ever go to war with each other. I mean, haven't you even read Kant? This is the garbage we are spoon-fed, force-fed, from the time we start school, public or private. It is so pervasive, so ubiquitous, so all-encompassing, that it doesn't even occur to us to ask, what did come before Rousseau and Kant? What came before the Enlightenment? You have some nebulous notion of, well, there were monarchies, and we know those are bad. I mean, if anybody goes to war, it's people fighting for the throne, right? Something about religion. I know there's a dark age back there. Catholic Church ruled a lot of stuff. That can't be good. That's a theocracy, right? We hate that. We here in America, we believe in the separation of church and state. We want that wall, as Jefferson said. And Jefferson, of course, he was a genius. Who could argue with him? But yeah, before Rousseau and Locke and Kant and the founding fathers, like, I don't know, everything was kind of just monarchies and Jesus and war, right? Who wants to go back to that? It doesn't even occur to us to think when we're sitting in a legal philosophy class, or as we called it at my law school, jurisprudence. It doesn't occur to us to think when we're sitting in philosophy class, because that was my bachelor's degree was in. It doesn't occur to us to think that there's like a completely different worldview on what law even means, on what society even means, on where order comes from, on what makes a legitimate government. Because we all know, those of us who were raised in America, we won the Cold War, God bless the USA, we know that legitimate government is of the people, by the people, for the people. I don't care if you're a Yankee or a Southerner. I don't care if you're East Coast establishment or you're a West Coast frontiersman. You know that Lincoln's right. Government is of the people, by the people, and for the people, and it shall not perish from the earth. No matter how much you hate those Democrats, or those Republicans, or those Libertarians, you gotta vote. It's your sacred duty as an American. How many times have you heard that phrase? Your sacred duty as an American to get out there and vote. Because we all agree, right? You popped out the womb and agreed we should vote for things. Public opinion should be considered by the rulers. The people rule this country. The politicians are elected by us. They should be listening to us. Simultaneously, we criticize everybody. We criticize all politicians, certainly, for being the weather vanes of public opinion, for not voting their conscience when it comes to a law, or not leading by what's right, and instead living by these 2 or 4 or 6 year cycles, the electoral cycles, based on what a public opinion poll says. We criticize them for that, and yet at the same time, we are the first ones in line to say, I don't like that, I'm going to vote him out. There's thousands, millions of us who believe X, and Congressman person voted Y. So he's got to go. Doesn't he know that all of us believe in X and he voted Y? Doesn't Joe Biden know about the red wave and all of these people who voted for Trump, and we don't like taxes and we don't like immigration and so on and so forth, and these people in this administration in Washington are not listening to us, the American people? It is so ingrained, this worldview is so ingrained in your head that it doesn't even occur to you that this is possibly a warped way of thinking. To say, well, we all believe this, so the people in Washington should be doing what we say. It makes me feel gross to think of this being a mode of thinking. But this is America. That's America. That is every single election you've ever voted in or refused to vote in because they're not taking your opinion into consideration. Don't even get me started on that. The vote abstainers who just know so much better than everybody else because they know not to vote because they're not going to take our opinions seriously anyway. Yeah. But isn't your entire worldview here that they should take your opinion seriously? That if the system weren't quote-unquote corrupt, like this isn't the way it was supposed to be, If the system weren't so corrupt, they would be listening to all of us. Our opinion would matter. Public opinion would matter. These elites and the Chi-Coms, these elites wouldn't be doing whatever they want. They'd be listening to us, the people, because legitimate government is of the people, by the people, for the people. I mean, Lincoln said it. You believe this so thoroughly that it never occurs to you to think, this is not real. In fact, before this myth of the social contract came about, before lawyers all took an oath to uphold the Constitution, before Rousseau and Kant and Locke, Second Treatise of Government, before Hobbes, before parliaments and congresses, before written constitutions, before separation of powers, before all of this that we know is the way that government works, there were actually very brilliant lawyers, you might even say geniuses, who thought all of this is insanity. This is Freemasonry. This is heresy. This is outright satanic. We don't even make any bones about it anymore. That the Founding Fathers were Freemasons, that they were deists. Don't even bat an eye. I mean, we know it was a Freemasonic revolution, the American Revolution of 1776. We know. Right? We've got pictures, paintings. They brag about it. George Washington in a Masonic apron. Everybody knows. But what's wrong with Freemasons? It's a club where you got secret handshakes and you learn how to be an ethical man, and they got barbecues. You bring the family. What's the problem? But there was a time when a lot of really intelligent people, a lot of very serious people, they thought that all of this was insane and that it was going to bring about the downfall of Western civilization. Not just Western civilization, the entire world. It was literally Satan attacking mankind with these ideas of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. With these ideas of popular elections, and there is no such thing as a divine right of kings, and separation of church and state. All of this was literally satanic. Now, you know how ridiculous that is. It's the way of the world. It's the way things are. Thank God. Thank God we can vote for these laws, and we can vote out those people who don't listen to us. So today we're going to read from The Reign of Christ the King in both Public and Private Life by Michael Davies. It's a short little booklet. It's only like 35 pages. The American Civic Religion, chimes in C.B. Robertson. Yes, I think I mentioned that in the newsletter. I posted the link up there. That this is the same, this secular religion that demands that you believe as an article of faith in the social contract, liberal democracy, the right to vote, equality, secularism, the separation of church and state. This same secular religion literally builds temples in Washington, D.C. to the Founding Fathers, to Abraham Lincoln. The Lincoln Memorial is a literal temple for this civic religion. Anyway, let's talk about what came before the Founding Fathers, before Montesquieu and Locke and all the things you are obligated to know in school because they're so brilliant. Before all that, and this is a giant synchronicity here, this Christ the King festival being yesterday, I just started listening to Diplomacy by Henry Kissinger. I say listening because I ain't got time for that. I'm listening to the Audible audiobook. Very good narration. Anyway, beginning of it is about Richelieu and William of Orange. And it talks about Richelieu and his rivalry with the Holy Roman Empire. And it talks about the universalism of the church. It talks about this exact thing that we are talking about. That before raison d'être, that before all this secular idea of the state, that this is what we do in politics as we understand it today. Before all that, there was this universal view that Christ was king. And not just over every individual Protestant who believes whatever he wants to believe because he read the Bible. Christ was king not just of an individual and his conscience and, or of priests in the Vatican. Christ was king over everything, the entire universe and every nation. So there was this notion in the Middle Ages that the entire world should be subject to Christ the King. That's what we're discussing today. Tellingly, Henry Kissinger, I forget what religion he was, probably not Catholic, he calls this fanaticism. In talking about the Holy Roman Emperor and saying that the Holy Roman Emperor emphasized the holy part of his title, he was a fanatic. He didn't want to listen to Richelieu. He didn't want to govern his state or the empire by rational means or by raison d'etat. He didn't want to talk about realpolitik. He actually believed that as the Holy Roman Emperor, his real power came from God himself. How insane is that compared to our enlightened age and understanding of government? He actually believed that he was required to be holy, that he had to actually abide by these religious laws, by this moral code. Crazy. So, Kissinger gleefully points out, Richelieu just tore everybody apart because everybody in Europe really believed this nonsense. That states should be governed by a moral code just like human beings, that rulers should take into consideration morality, Catholic morality, namely. And he pointed out how brilliant it was for Richelieu to support the Protestant governments against the Universal Catholic Church. Just brilliant. So that is the contrast that we are discussing today. I think we're going to skip over the introduction to this because some inside baseball, if you're not Catholic, it's like, you don't really care about Second Vatican Council and post-Vatican II epic and all that stuff. So let's go ahead to the social kingship of Christ. Let's go to that subheading. Michael Davies writes, "No one claiming to be a Christian would, one hopes, dispute the fact that as individuals we must submit ourselves to the rule of Christ the King. But very few Christians, Catholics included, and conservative Catholics among them, understand, let alone uphold, the social kingship of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is an attitude which is very common among certain well-known politicians in the United States, who, while claiming to be Catholics, state with apparent pride that they do not permit their private beliefs to impinge upon their public duties. They uphold with apparent certainty the principle of the separation of church and state. This is a very strange attitude for a Catholic to take, but some of these politicians appear to be very strange Catholics." I'd point out this was written in 1992. This is not about Joe Biden being president. The separation of church and state was condemned unequivocally by the Roman pontiffs until the Second Vatican Council. That's its own story. We are not getting into that today. The Church's teaching is that the state has an obligation to render public worship to God in accord with the teachings of the true Church, the Catholic Church, and positively to aid the Catholic Church in the carrying out of her functions. The state does not have the right to remain neutral regarding religion, much less to pursue a secular approach in its policies. A secular approach is by that very fact an anti-God and an anti-Christ approach. This unequivocal teaching was summarized very clearly by Pope St. Pius X, who, in his encyclical Vehementernos, condemned the principle of the separation of church and state as an absolutely false and most pernicious thesis. The practical consequences of this Catholic teaching are difficult to imagine for those of us who have known nothing but a secular state, in which the state claims to have no responsibilities in matters of religion and morality. The secular state outlaws certain immoral acts, not because they are immoral, but because the majority wish them outlawed. Nevertheless, we must admit that this claim of the secular state is profoundly wrong. I don't know where it is in this booklet, so we're just going to pause here and point this out. Here is the major difference. In our form of government, in what we understand to be legitimate government of the people, by the people, for the people, if you're a majority and you vote for it, granted you're not violating somebody's rights under the 14th Amendment, so on and so forth. If you vote for it, if everybody votes for it, it becomes law. Therefore, it's public opinion. It's the majority will. It's the will of the people. You've heard all of these phrases countless times in your life. I know you have. That is what makes a law. The will of the people. They all get together, they vote, bam, it's a law. What makes it legitimate? Well, on the one hand, everybody voted for it. So that demonstrates to you what the people want. On the other hand, the Constitution either doesn't forbid it or explicitly allows it or whatever it is. It's not unconstitutional, is the point of it. So if the people want it and it's not unconstitutional, it's a law. That's legitimate. There you go. But what he's talking about here is immorality. There is an objective morality, and it's defined by the Catholic Church. That's the natural law. We've discussed that on this program many times before. It is the ruler's duty to take such measures as would implement or at least recognize the natural law. A ruler doesn't pass laws, an absolute monarch even, just because that's his whim or fancy for the day. It is his obligation as the ruler. At that point, you didn't even need to say as the Catholic ruler, but as the ruler, it is his obligation to pass these laws that are in accordance with the natural law and that establish the natural law upon earth. That is what makes it legitimate. If it violates the natural law, it's out. It's an illegitimate law. Lex injusta non est lex, as St. Augustine said. So, if, 1,000 years ago, some Catholic king passed a law that said, I'm going to let every girl and boy in the land decide what gender he is. If a boy believes he's a girl, we will give him the latest advances in science to cut off his penis, and he can have all the hormones that he can take. Obviously, that would be an illegitimate law. Not because all the people disagree with it, but because it is in clear violation of the natural law. That is the standard. Is it in accordance with the natural law? Today, the reason I would say we have all of this bloody insanity is people really believe that the measure of a legitimate law is what the people want. How many people will vote for it? How can we get this legislation passed? Or how can we block this legislation? Or how can we amend this legislation? Or how can we filibuster this? Those are the considerations. They're not considering, is this in accordance with the natural law? Because it would go no further. Obviously, it is an affront to the natural law. It is an affront to the natural order. It is an affront to God to say that children should be allowed to cut off their genitals. It is so beyond insane that you just throw up your hands and think, how did we get here? Right. We got here because we all believe in the social contract. We believe in voting. We believe that what makes something legitimate is that a lot of people want it and it's not unconstitutional. If that's your measure of law, then you are just jumping off the cliff. So that's the distinction. To continue with Davies' book, or booklet. The only word adequate to describe the claim by a Catholic politician that he will not allow his private beliefs to impinge upon his public duties is blasphemy, or at least open rebellion against God. For the commandments of God are binding in public as well as private, and it is blasphemous for a Christian to maintain the contrary. The commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," precludes the taking of innocent human life. We can take another human life only as an act of self-defense, to save our lives, those of our families or friends or our fellow citizens against an unjust aggressor. But never does any human being have the right to take the life of an innocent person. Unborn infants certainly come into this category, a fact stated forcefully, courageously, and unambiguously by our Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, in his encyclical Centesimus Annus of 1 May 1991. This is clearly not an unbiased tract. Who could be more innocent of aggressive intent than an unborn child within the womb of its mother? And then he goes into Governor Cuomo. Again, this is 1992. So we're going to skip over all that and go to the next subheading, the rise of a heresy. Authority comes from the people. So like I said, there were a lot of people before Rousseau and Kant and Locke and Hobbes who believed that all of this talk about separation of powers and authority comes from the people and separation of church and state, so on and so forth, all of this was heresy. It was all satanic. Greetings, Florida Treasure, who says she's a big fan of E. Michael Jones, traditional Catholic scholar and commentator. Well, if he writes something legal, maybe we'll read it on this program. Or maybe not, because YouTube has not been bought yet by Elon Musk. So probably won't read E. Michael Jones on here. Michael Davies, however. The rise of a heresy, authority comes from the people. It would be a mistake to imagine that the dethronement of our Lord began at the end of the 18th century, with the promulgation by the French revolutionaries of the so-called rights of man. The process began 4 centuries earlier, in 14th century Italy, during what has become known as the Renaissance. The word is French and means rebirth. It refers to the rebirth of classical studies, which began in Italy in the 14th century. Those engaged in these studies were known as humanists because their studies were concerned with purely human topics, whereas in Europe until that time, God had been the focus for almost every aspect of scholarship and art. Music, architecture, literature, painting, drama, philosophy, cosmology, and above all, theology, the queen of the sciences, were centered upon the Creator, and the creator-creature relationship was axiomatic to every aspect of human thought. Initially, there was no conflict between humanism and the church. Many humanists were also ecclesiastics. But as time passed, it became clear that the movement was tending to relegate religion to a place where it had little or no influence on human thought or human behavior. This tendency was implicit rather than explicit. It gave rise to the attitude that whereas faith is valid in its own domain, reason should be concerned only with what is scientifically demonstrable. The creator-creature relationship was not formally denied, but attention became focused almost exclusively on man, to the neglect of God, who was effectively confined to the sacristy. Man was seen as an autonomous being, the focus of truth, and a world of which he was master, in which he had the ability to subdue and perfect, a being capable of building an earthly paradise by his own efforts, a utopia. The extent to which these ideas were reflected in the principles of the French Revolution, and later in atheistic communism, hardly needs pointing out. The practical result of humanism was the divinization of man. The more God was diminished, the more man exalted himself and became his own God. And this is not hyperbolic, as an aside. In fact, everything we've read to this point is equally valid for occultism. as it is for liberalism or humanism. It's all one and the same. To think that Freemasonry is not occultism is just, it's baffling. I wouldn't even say it's naive. It's so far beyond naive. It's a cognitive dissonance that there is no getting through to. And it is, in substance, in essence, in everything, it is occultism. Freemasonry's effect on the monarchies of Europe and of America, by the way, it's indisputable. So to think that there are no occult roots to liberalism, to the revolutionaries throughout the West, it's just being willfully blind to history. So this point of Davies that humanism exalts man until he becomes his own God, what's the difference? You, citizen, you are free of God, free of any church. We have a separation of church and state. You can vote however you want. You can vote for kids to chop off their genitals any day of the week. Well, whenever elections fall, anyway. You can vote for that. You, with your reason, you know what's best in the world. You know that politicians should be listening to you because you're so smart. In fact, you were so smart you didn't go into politics because, really smart people don't do that. You've become a god when you can vote for these things, when you can make laws absolutely not tied to the natural law, not tied to any sense of order, not tied to anything but your whim, your will, your intellect, what you know to be right. So it's not overstating the point when he compares humanism and liberalism as this exaltation, there's no other way to put it, this satanic exaltation of making oneself God. In his book, Christian Humanism, Professor Thomas Molnar provides us with the following definition. Humanism was a doctrine or network of doctrines putting man in place of God and endowing him with features that he was inevitably to abuse. I have mentioned the extent to which the principles of humanism reached their logical conclusion in the French Revolution and in communism, but the Protestant Reformation cannot be exempted from this charge. Not that I disagree with it, but we're going to skip over that because I'm not doing this whole punching right thing where we, no, I'm not doing the infighting thing. Let's go to do the church and democracy, or we could do, where are we at? Civil law and the eternal law. Don't want to do quas primas. What is liberalism? There we go. The essence of liberalism is the view that the individual human being has the right to decide for himself the norms by which he will regulate his life. I think that's fair. I think this is a fair assessment of liberalism, which is why I'm fast forwarding here. That, and we have like 5 minutes left. So his definition, I think, is pretty fair. The essence of liberalism is the view that the individual human being has the right to decide for himself the norms by which he will regulate his life. That he has the right to be his own arbiter as to what is right and what is wrong, and that he is under no obligation to submit himself to any external authority. In the liberal sense, liberty of conscience is the right of an individual to think and believe whatsoever he wants, even in religion and morality. He has the right to choose any religion or to have no religion. And he has the right to express his views publicly and to persuade others to adopt them using word of mouth, the public press, or any other means. Again, I think that's fair. That's how we were all raised in America. You have the right to think what you want. I may disagree with you, but I'll fight for your right to say it. You have the right to engage in the marketplace of ideas, to debate, to argue over whatever you want, to get into Facebook comment threads and say your opinion. Well, not anymore, not since 2017, but you used to have the right to debate this all day long. right? So we believe, as long as you're not a white supremacist, we believe that you have liberty of conscience. You have the right to decide for yourself what's right and what's wrong. And to vote on that fact. To vote your conscience. And you can use any means to persuade others. You can write books about it. Write essays. Write posts. Vlog. Again, as long as you're not a white supremacist. A dramatic and... Nope. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's get banned. We got 2 minutes left anyway. Here we go. A dramatic and depressing instance of this liberal thesis being translated into practice is the campaign for so-called gay rights in the United States and in Great Britain. Here with a vengeance are so-called liberties, which modern society takes for granted that every man possesses as a right. In the United States, you are witnessing the scarcely credible spectacle of Catholic bishops taking it for granted that homosexuals have a right to indulge in and to propagandize in favor of their unnatural vice, and even, in some cases, helping them actively in their campaign. In Connecticut in 1991, a so-called gay rights bill was passed, primarily due to the support of the Catholic bishops in that state. The bill even allows homosexuals to adopt or to become foster parents of young children. Boy, I don't know if Michael Davies is still alive, but these words did not age well. I'll tell you that. Point being, in 1992, that was outrageous, right? This was lunacy, especially lunacy that a Catholic bishop could get on board with something this liberal and secular that would be so far divergent from the natural law. Just vote your conscience. Whatever's happening in your own bedroom, government can't tell you what to do. We talked about that when Roe v. Wade was overturned. All that led up to that was that argument. Government can't tell two consenting adults not to engage in sodomy. Government has no right to do that. Government can't tell a husband and wife not to use contraceptives. But of course, that was never really the end of it, was it? It wasn't the government has no right to tell a man and woman what to do in their bedroom. That's how they sold it. But of course, it turned into you can buy Trojans and 20 other brands in aisle 10 24 hours a day. Do whatever you want. Zero consequences. And if you do have a consequence on accident, you got the morning after pill. That doesn't work. We have an entire industry for murdering your babies. Don't worry, ladies. What a slippery slope. And they call that a logical fallacy, but look where we are today. So in this short program, you just read some excerpts from The Reign of Christ the King in Both Public and Private Life by Michael Davies. Some excerpts that should show the contrast between what we think of as modern law, the foundations, the substance of modern law, and, on the other hand, medieval law. The notion that there is a universal rule of a monarch that should be implemented, and that monarch is Christ himself. The notion that a monarch on earth cannot make law or enforce law that is contrary to the natural law. That he cannot govern based on his own whim or make laws based on what he wants or what he thinks is expedient, but rather that all of your actions as a ruler, as someone he thinks is... Don't do that. As someone entrusted by God with power, these are the obligations set upon you. So, all of this is because yesterday was the festival, or the feast rather, of Christ the King. Next week, probably back to reading the news. Wait a minute, next week... Is next week Election Day? Next Tuesday? I believe it is. We're going to have a fun program next week, I'm sure of it. We'll be back to reading the news. Let's see. I posted the newsletter. Please look in the chat for the newsletter. Sign up there. We got the viral style inside of the newsletter. Buy some t-shirts, etc., etc. And we will see you next Tuesday. Till then.